Well, we've been talking about monarch butterflies now for feels like 10 to 15 years. Of course, we always talked about monarch butterflies because they are what we call the charismatic macroflora. You recognize them when you see them, you know what they are, and people have a familiarity with them, and that makes them approachable. And when people approach monarch butterflies, we then have the opportunity to tell them about other butterflies. We have an opportunity to tell them about other insects. And we have an opportunity to tell them about the ecosystem for those insects as well. So I'm going to share my screen now and show you the PowerPoint that I have prepared. And so we're going to talk about that ecosystem, but we're going to talk about it from the home, garden, and landscape point of view. And that's a different story than what you may hear from some other specialists from Iowa State University who are talking about monarchs from the field or from the agricultural point of view. But monarchs are one of those butterflies we all tend to recognize, and most of us now can recognize the scientific name Danaus plexippus. But the monarch butterfly is a native of North America, and it was named by the North American settlers in honor of King William III, who was also known as the Prince of Orange. And the orange color is one of the distinctive characteristics of the monarch butterfly, and that led to its name. And it's part of a group of butterflies that are connected to royalty. And so monarch represents that royalty. Now the scientific name, the genus name, Danaus, refers to a character from Greek mythology, a character named Danaus, who was the son of Belus, who was the king of Egypt. So again, a connection to royalty with this particular group of butterflies that are out there. Well, all of the butterflies, the skippers, and the moths are in this insect order called Lepidoptera. And those of you who have taken the Master Gardener training remember that that order name means they have scaly wings. That is the dust that you feel when you rub the wings of moths and butterflies. And in North America, we have about 13,000 species in this order, Lepidoptera. Now, of that 13,000, 12,000 of them are moths. And moths have been around much, much longer than butterflies. There were moths before the dinosaurs, but the butterflies didn't emerge until after the dinosaurs. So they're a much smaller group. The monarch butterfly is in a family called nymphalid butterflies, also known as the brush-footed butterflies because of a little comb they have on their front legs. And there's a couple hundred species in that group. And then when we get down to what we call the milkweed butterflies, there's actually 10 different species in North America. But in that particular group of the monarch butterfly, there are 3 species, and the one we always concentrate on is the one called the monarch butterfly. So enough about the taxonomy and the background. I don't think you'll have any trouble recognizing monarchs, but if that's a question, we can answer that one at the end as well. But what we really want to talk about is the population decline that has occurred with the monarch butterflies. And there's no one reason. I think at the top of the list should be the loss of habitat, the loss of food source for butterflies and all kinds of insects, including monarchs. But the fact that we plowed up 98% of the state of Iowa prairie and put it into corn and soybeans has not been good for insect diversity. So getting back that diversity is one of the things we're going to try to talk about. Pesticide use, and specifically herbicides that have destroyed milkweeds, appear to be a big part of this population decline. Now, when you say pesticides, most people immediately think of insecticides. But remember, pesticide is an umbrella term. It covers insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, pesticides, avicides, bactericides. Those are all pesticides. So we remember to need to be, try to be specific in what we're referring to. Finally, climate change has not been kind to monarch butterflies, and especially intense weather events can ruin their egg laying, it can ruin their survival and cause problems. Now, one of the questions that comes up, well, sure, monarchs have declined, but how bad is it really? How bad is that decline? Well, it's so bad that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, that enforces the Federal Endangered and Threatened Species Act, spent years in analyzing all the data they could get on monarch butterflies. And at the end of that analysis, a year ago, December 2020, they issued a statement that said, the monarch butterfly should be listed as endangered or threatened. Listing is warranted, but there were too many other fires already burning, so they pushed the monarch butterfly off for another year. It should be listed as threatened or endangered, but we have too many other problems that are ahead of it in the list. That's how bad some of these things are. So that's how bad the monarch situation is. It's bad enough to be considered endangered or threatened. Now, a little bit about life cycle, because an entomologist can't talk without talking about the insect life cycle. You remember all butterflies, moths have a complete life cycle. The same with beetles and flies and wasps and bees and ants, where there's an immature stage, a larva, well, in this case, we call it a caterpillar, that goes into a transformation or a metamorphosis stage called the pupa. Only in the case of butterflies, we specifically call that a chrysalis. And then after remodeling and remanufacturing itself inside that case, it emerges as the adult to start that cycle over. So egg, larva, pupa, and adult is the life cycle of the monarch butterfly and all the other insects with a complete life cycle. Now, in the middle of the summer, that takes about a month to go from a caterpillar feeding on milkweeds. And we keep talking about milkweeds because that's the only thing that monarch caterpillars can eat. There can be a smorgasbord of available plants out there, but the caterpillar of the monarch butterfly will only survive on milkweed. So how does the caterpillar get on milkweeds if that's all it can eat? Fortunately, mom takes care of that. The female monarch butterfly will only lay her eggs on milkweeds. She will lay her eggs where her offspring have the best chance of growth and survival. So she lays her eggs on milkweeds, and that's why the caterpillars are found there. The adult butterflies feed on nectar from a wide variety of plants, but they will go back to the milkweeds to feed on the nectar from the milkweed flowers. So that life cycle is complete. We can get several generations per year up here in the north, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But here's one more look at the coloration and the markings of the monarch butterfly, the orange wings, the black veins, the thick black veins in the case of the female monarch, the thin black wing veins in the case of the male. And in the male, there's that enlarged black spot in the hind wing. So males and females can be distinguished if you get a good close look at them, especially if you can see the hind wing. In the summer, those adults are only going to live for a couple of weeks, maybe 6 weeks at the most, but most adult insects have a very short lifespan, during which time they have to mate, they have to lay eggs, and then pretty quickly they're going to die. So in the summer generation, there's only a brief period that those butterflies will be alive in the adult stage. Now, it may have taken 3 weeks to get through the caterpillar stage, and the adult stage isn't going to be much more than that. In the fall, the monarch butterflies that emerge are going to live for the next 8 to 9 months. And that's a pretty special characteristic to think about. You could change your life cycle, you could change your life longevity from just half a month up to 9 months. And that's a special adaptation that allows them to accomplish what they have to do to survive the winter. And we'll talk about that in just a second here. The monarch butterfly was found in North America first. That's its native area, but it has spread throughout the North American continent. There are some down in the South America, up the very top edge of North America. They have moved to some islands out in the Atlantic Ocean, down in the Caribbean, and also over into the Pacific. And monarch butterflies have made their way to Australia. So they're scattered around the world, but most of the talk about monarch butterfly decline occurs right here at home in the United States. Not all monarch butterflies in the United States are of the same type. There are actually 3 different types of monarch butterflies here in North America. We are in what's called the eastern population, and that covers about 2/3 of the United States, everything from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic Ocean. That's a interbreeding group of monarchs that sort of stay isolated from the others, but not completely. There's a western population of monarch butterflies that's on the other side of the Rocky Mountains, and generally the Rocky Mountains keep those 2 groups apart. It's pretty hard to get over a mountain peak when you're a little tiny butterfly, but some of them do it, and so there are those 2 groups. Now, in addition, down in Florida, they have monarchs year-round. They never leave like they do from the eastern population and the western population. Those are migratory. Eastern and western populations migrate out of their breeding area to an overwintering site, and then they migrate back. But there's a group down in Florida that doesn't do that. They stay put the year round. The reason monarchs migrate is because they cannot survive the winter. They don't have the ability to hunker down like a woolly bear caterpillar. They don't have the ability to go into diapause in the egg stage like the rootworms do in your cornfield. They don't have the ability to hibernate under loose bark of dead trees like lady beetles and some other insects. They just don't have that ability. So instead, they migrate out of Iowa as the winter approaches to someplace that will be cool and humid. Now, hot and humid would be detrimental to them. Cold and humid would be detrimental to them. So they need to find a place to spend the winter that's going to keep them cool to save their energy, but humid to keep them moist. And they find that all the way down in south central Mexico. So all of our monarchs left last September and October. They flew across the state. They flew south through Arkansas, down across Texas. They went all the way to south central Mexico, where they can spend the winter. So what do you know about insect migration? You may have heard some things about migrations in the past. You may have seen National Geographic specials on the migratory locusts, which are a type of grasshopper in Africa, where there would be swarms of grasshoppers that would cause the sky to turn dark as they flew across. So these huge migrations are fairly well known. Now, a migration means they are moving in a seasonal pattern under their own power. They're not being pushed, they're not being carried. They are making the transit themselves. They're navigating, they are orienting, they're going to someplace. And not only the locusts of Africa do that, but here in the United States, dragonflies, beetles, moths, and butterflies all have this migratory behavior. Now, one of the migratory behaviors that you might be familiar with are the multicolored Asian lady beetles. And so the question comes up, why do those orange lady beetles with the orange spots, called the Asian lady beetles, why do they migrate from soybean fields to houses in September and October? The multicolored Asian lady beetles been in Iowa since about 1988. 1994, I'm sorry, it was the United States 1988, in the state of Iowa 1994. So we've had a lot of experience with this, flying out of the soybean fields, out of the trees and gardens, landing on the side of your house in October, and then crawling in and being an accidental invader. So we've talked to a lot of people about migrating lady beetles, and we ask them, why do those Asian lady beetles migrate? And they will tell you it's because of combines. Really? Honestly, they think the combines moving in the fields in September and October are forcing the lady beetles out of the field. Of course, the lady beetles left the field much earlier than that because the leaves fell off, and when the leaves fell off, there were no aphids for them to eat. So this theory that combines cause migration of lady beetles is not true at all. And what we know, in fact, is that the lady beetles migrate after a frost, but on a really warm day. Now, Ohio State University puts that at the first day above 64 degrees after an overnight temperature near freezing. We were a little less precise. We just said they migrate on the first warm day after the first frost. So that just happens to coincide with when soybeans are being harvested. Soybean harvest has nothing to do with the migration of the lady beetles. So now back to the monarch butterfly. Why do monarch butterflies migrate? No, they don't migrate because of combines. That's we already disproved that. The monarch butterflies migrate in response to cool temperatures and short day lengths. See, I'm not the only one who responds to short days. The monarch butterflies are also measuring that change in day length. And when it reaches a certain tipping point, it's time to migrate. Now, at the same time, temperatures will be cooling off as they do in the fall of the year. But that migration is triggered by the cool temperatures and the short day lengths. Now, one of the phenomena that we get to see occasionally, not as often maybe as we used to, are these monarch overnight roosts. Here's one that was taken by Robert Woodward back in 2010 over at the Neil Smith Wildlife Refuge. Hundreds or thousands of monarch butterflies that are traveling all the way from Canada through Minnesota, through Iowa, toward Mexico, will spend the night clinging to the foliage of a tree. And that tree will turn orange with the number of monarchs that are up in that tree. So it's one of those phenomena that you hope to see again in this lifetime. And we hope that migration can continue and be supported by the actions we're taking. So the monarchs migrate out of the Corn Belt. They migrate out of Canada. They migrate out of the entire eastern 2/3 of the United States, about 2,000 miles down to that blue spot in south central Mexico. And that spot was known to Mexicans for a long time, of course, but it was in 1975 that they were tagging monarch butterflies leaving Canada, and they found tagged monarchs along the route and determined that it was these hillsides in south central Mexico where the monarchs were going. Now, on the other side of the Rocky Mountains, the western population of monarchs moves to the coast, down maybe into a little bit of Baja California, but they move out of the Central Valley and move into the coastal area to spend the winter. So this fall migration is just one of the phenomena of life that just sort of baffles the imagination, that in order to survive, in order to reach the next breeding period and perpetuate the species, these butterflies take off and fly thousands of miles to a special location. Now, that special location are mountaintop oyamel fir forests. These are, it's a kind of tree that grows at higher elevations, and it provides what the monarchs need for that survival. Now, most of the monarchs are going to be above 3,000 meters. That's about 9,800 feet above sea level, 2 miles above sea level. So they're at quite a high elevation, but up there at that elevation, it's going to be cool. And because of the prevailing winds off the Pacific Ocean, that area is also going to be a fog or a cloud forest, and that will provide moisture for them. So it will stay cool, but not freeze most of the time. And the trees are tall enough to protect them from winds. So they've got everything they need. They've got physical protection, they've got moisture, they've got cool temperatures to save their energy, because come spring, they're going to return north. After having flown all the way south, they're going to start back north. But this forest area in Mexico is an essential part of their survival. And when they get snowstorms or ice storms or landslides or logging, if they get deforestation in those areas, it is detrimental to the monarchs that are trying to make it through the winter. Now, this sounds like maybe it's a big area, but it's really limited to only 12 mountaintops down there in south central Mexico, where the monarch butterflies will make these overwintering roosts. and they will roost by the tens of millions. All the monarchs that could make it from the eastern United States are down there now, waiting out winter on one of these 12 isolated hilltops. And it's kind of a precarious situation. If those hilltops have a mudslide, if they have logging, that area would be lost and it would no longer be suitable for the monarchs. So we have to cooperate with the Mexican government to preserve those forests that are down there as well. So what does it look like when you're down there in the monarch habitat? I wish I knew from personal experience. I only know from pictures. Tens of millions of monarchs fluttering about on warm days and then clustering, weighting down the branches with their weight because there's so many of them during the cooler time periods, and so many of them in the forest that the forest actually looks orange from the air, like you see in that lower left-hand picture. So quite the phenomenon, and it's on my bucket list to get there to see it. I hope I do someday. So having made it through the winter because they were in the right environment, they will start north sometime in February and by the mid-March. And those monarchs that were down there and survived the winter will start back north, and they will lay their eggs on the first milkweeds they find. So sometime in northern Mexico or in Texas, they will lay eggs to start the next generation. We do not get back the monarchs we sent. We may get back the children of the monarchs we sent. We may get back the grandchildren of the monarchs we sent to Mexico. We do not get back the original monarchs. So that spring migration brings them back into the United States, and then subsequent generations bring them back up into the Midwest, on up into Canada. Now, one of the crises that's facing monarch butterflies is drought in Texas. If there's drought in Texas in March when the monarchs arrive, there's not enough milkweed for them. So we need milkweeds to produce butterflies in the summer. Texas needs rainfall and milkweeds to produce monarchs in the early spring, sometime in March. So migration is the two-way street here. So when do we get our monarchs back? When do we get back the children or the grandchildren of our monarchs? Depends on the year. In some years it's April. You can see it was April 25th last year. Some years it doesn't happen until the first or second week of May. May 2nd in 2020, May 9th in 2018. So mid to late April, we can expect to see a monarch floating into our yard. By May, we certainly expect to see them. How do we know that? There's a group called Journey North that does citizen science, and they have a website where you can report monarch butterfly sightings. And they report by date and by geographic location, your GPS coordinates. And that's what that map indicates, that through April 25th, you could see that there were lots of monarchs from Tennessee on down through Florida. There were lots of monarchs in Texas and Oklahoma, maybe up into Arizona. But even in Iowa, there was one that had been found by that April 25th reporting date. So citizen science works. If you're interested in that, you can Google Journey North. It's a website that follows monarch migration. They follow milkweed emergence. They follow hummingbird migration. They are using citizen observations to gather data that helps us understand what's going on. Well, they get back here, 2 to 3 generations will reproduce up here in the Corn Belt. We, here in the heart of the Corn Belt, produce about 50% of the monarchs for the entire eastern part of the United States. So it's pretty important that they find milkweeds here so they can reproduce during the summer, so we can send a large number of monarchs back to Mexico the following year. The monarch population decline is real. It really is happening. And I already told you that it's probably habitat loss. It's a lack of food for their caterpillars. There's overwintering site issues that I mentioned. but especially here in the breeding sites, this is the upper Midwest, is where we're worried about the monarch butterflies finding enough food for their offspring to eat, for the population to grow, to replenish the ones that were lost to the winter, replenish the ones that were hit by the grill of semi trucks going down the road. Lots of reasons monarchs die during that migration. This graph has been produced now since 1994, and it shows us the area of South Central Mexico forests that were occupied by monarch butterflies. And of course, it's measured in hectares. So back in 96, the winter of 96 to 97, the monarchs were covering 18.9 hectares. Okay, multiply that by 2.5, you'll have the number of acres. This past year, the monarch butterflies covered the trees in an area of 2.1 hectares, about 5 acres, more or less. That's all the area that they took. Now, to convert that, hang on, okay, to show you how that's done, here again is that picture of the forest taken from the air. And there are people who are specially trained to walk around the outside of that area. And then they calculate the area inside the red line, and that's the area that was reported as the area for the overwintering population estimate. It's not that they're counting butterflies, they're just measuring the area that's occupied by butterflies. Now, they guess there could be about 50 million monarchs per hectare, or about 20 million monarchs per acre down in that area. So back in 1997, there were 910 million monarch butterflies in Mexico waiting to come back and reproduce in North America. This past year, that population was only 105 million. So you can see the decline that has occurred over that time that they've been making these measurements. And another way to say it, since 1996, 1997, the monarch population in the overwintering area has declined 88%. We only have about 20% of the butterflies we used to have. It'll only be 12%. I'm sorry, only about 12% of the butterflies we used to have. So this decline is quite steep. It's quite noticeable. And we see it just in the number of monarchs that are here in Iowa in the summer. Yes, by fall, we may have reproduced enough monarchs that they'll be noticeable, but certainly not like it was just about 3 decades or so ago. So why are the monarchs struggling? Number one, loss of milkweeds. Without milkweeds, the monarchs can't reproduce, the caterpillars can't eat, caterpillars can't grow, there won't be any new adults. So loss of milkweeds in Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona, Arkansas, loss of milkweeds in Iowa, it's all part of it. Part of this is blamed on intensive farming, that our farming practices have changed in the last 20 years, and that may be part of the loss of milkweeds. We also don't have the wild areas we used to. We don't have prairies and meadows and pastures like we used to. We plowed them up and made streets and shopping malls out of all of those areas. Another threat is deforestation in Mexico. Pesticides, including insecticides and herbicides, could be part of this, and then unfavorable weather as well. So lots of things going on, most of them out of our reach, most of them things we can't do anything about, but some that we can. Now, when I was a kid back in the 60s in Ohio, hoeing weeds out of beans, the estimate is from 1970 to 1990, there were 40 to 50 milkweed stems per acre. This isn't my family for hoeing weeds, but I suppose that's about what we looked like hoeing weeds when I was a kid. If you ask most people today, how many milkweeds do you think are in a soybean field? They're probably going to tell you 0, but it's not quite that bad. One of the estimates that made a decade ago was that there are still 7 to 10 milkweed stems per acre in a soybean field in Iowa. So between 1999 and 2010, there was an 81% decline in agricultural milkweed populations. how many milkweeds are in corn and soybean fields now compared to then? It has declined 81%. We have put the word weed in milkweed and pretty much eliminated it. And how did we do that? By and large, we did it with herbicide tolerant crops. You might call this glyphosate ready, or you may call it Roundup ready corn and soybeans. Out of the 91 million acres of corn in the US, 90% of it can be treated with a herbicide that will kill all the weeds, including the milkweeds. 90 million acres of soybeans in the United States, 94% of it is treated with Roundup or glyphosate or dicamba or another herbicide that will kill weeds but not kill the plant. So our farming practices changed, and we lost 850 million milkweeds in about 2 decades' time. So the food source for the monarchs has greatly decreased. Now, again, this is some research that was done at Iowa State University. This may not apply across the entire corn belt, but for us here in Iowa, this tells what happened to milkweeds. And that appears to be one of the major reasons for the loss of monarchs is the loss of milkweeds. Now, what can be done? What we would like to do is put the milkweeds back. We would like to put the milkweeds back where they were. We would like to have the biodiversity of blooming plants for butterflies like monarchs and pollinators like bees. We would like to have that diversity back. Rather than monocultures of corn and soybeans, we would like to have diversity that would provide nectar for the adults and food sources for the caterpillars. We would like to reduce pesticide use, especially herbicides and insecticides that might be toxic to the food source or to the insect directly. And if this were a pollinator talk, we would be talking about bee nest sites. But what can be done is provide for them as best we can. Now, this may be what we want. We may want a prairie full of milkweeds and blooming plants and lots of different plants out there, lots of different kinds of milkweed, but most of us aren't going to be able to do that. If you do have that kind of land space, Iowa State University Monarch Consortium has provided a monarch seed mix where you could use your farm bill money to seed those CRP fields, to seed those prairies, the roadsides, so that you had blooms through spring and fall for the monarchs and the other insects that are out there. So if you have that kind of space, you could make a big impact by seeding all these different plants, including lots of different milkweeds as well. But most of us are going to have to get by with a small spot of land that we own and control. It may be a fairly large backyard where we can convert it to some monarch habitat. Maybe it's an area around our patio that isn't quite the entire yard, but we can work with whatever we've got. And maybe all you've got is a planter or a raised bed, in which case you can still contribute milkweeds to the monarchs by planting in those areas. Whatever you do to create a monarch habitat, go ahead and put up a sign. The butterflies don't care, but on our Iowa State University research farms, we have these signs that advertise Monarch Butterfly habitat. You can donate to the program and get a Monarch way station sign. You can put up a big concrete sign that says, "This is where my butterflies live." The sign doesn't help the butterflies, but it helps the neighbors understand why you're growing weeds, okay? And growing weeds is part of what we're doing there as well. So whatever you do, go ahead and put up a sign that said, "Monarchs are welcome here," as well as the rest of the butterflies and pollinators. We have a pamphlet through Iowa State University Extension called Gardening for Butterflies and Pollinators. We lumped both things together. If you're doing a butterfly garden, you're pretty much doing a pollinator garden. If you're doing a pollinator garden, it's going to be good for butterflies. So if you can go to the ISU Extension store, you can search for butterflies. You can search for its code number RG601, or you can just do a Google search, Iowa State University Gardening for Butterflies, and I'm pretty sure you'll get that. And those are going to be much easier than following the website that I put there, which is a shortcut to the Iowa State Extension store. So this pamphlet will tell you what you need to do gardening for butterflies. It will also tell you what plants you might consider planting. It's getting a little old from 2015. The revision will be out next spring. So in time for planting next year, we'll have a new one out for that. So if you're thinking about a butterfly garden, first of all, you make a plan. Isn't that how you do your gardening? I do my gardening by going to the garden center, seeing something I like, buying it, bringing it home and saying, now where do I plant this? That's my process. I hope you have a better process of actually looking ahead. What would be my plan? What would where will I put these plants for the butterflies? Here's the bad news for many of us. The butterfly garden needs to be a sunny location. I have a shady garden. I have a hosta garden. It's not going to be good for butterflies because I can't grow the plants that the butterflies need. So your area needs 6 to 8 hours of sunshine a day. Of course, all gardens need well-drained soils. In addition to flowers, you can consider trees and shrubs part of your butterfly garden. And what we're looking for is season-long bloom. It's easy to get flowers to bloom in May. You can easily get flowers in June, but what do you do in July and August? What do you have that's blooming at that time of the year? And certainly by September, you've got asters blooming, but what else have you got? You've got goldenrod, but it's hard to get flowers that will bloom all year. We want to watch for aggressive species, and we want a variety of flowers. We don't want a whole garden of one thing. Horticulturists tell us to plant in clumps. What we found out is the butterflies don't care. The butterflies don't care if you have a clump of one kind of flower or if you mix them all together. The butterflies will find what they need either way. So how do you establish a butterfly habitat? You plan it, you plant it, and then you do the 4 W's. You wait, watch, water, and weed. It's going to take a couple of years to establish milkweeds. It's going to take a couple of years before it looks anything like a prairie. And during that time, you're going to have to baby those plants along. You're going to have to beat back the weeds. You're going to have to pull out the creeping Charlie. You're going to have to pull out the crabgrass that's growing in your monarch habitat so that you can establish the plants that you want. So plan, plant, wait, watch, water, and weed. That's how you get that area established. And in that plan, there better be milkweeds because that is the food for the caterpillars and the nectar source for the butterflies as well. Now the female monarchs will lay their eggs on any milkweed. So of the 18 kinds that we have here in the state of Iowa, they prefer the common milkweed and the swamp milkweed. One of our previous graduate students, Victoria, looked at all different kinds of milkweeds. She counted the eggs. The common milkweed and the swamp milkweed were the most popular, but there were eggs on all milkweeds. So you've got lots of choices on what kinds to plant. Common and swamp milkweed are right at the top of the list. Butterfly milkweed is a great one because of its bright orange blooms that come kind of mid-season. It's a native prairie plant here for Iowa. The other one that works well is called world milkweed. And so you've got lots of milkweed choices that you can get out to find out there. Again, there are lots of sources for information, and our pamphlet is one. There's this group called Monarch Watch down in Kansas that for a donation will send you a sign that says Monarch Way Station. That means you have found a sunny location, you've planted 2 or more species of milkweed, you've got your nectar plants, you're doing what you want, you register your garden with the Monarch Watch, and you get this sign that says Monarch Way Station. They have lots of details about monarchs and the plants that they need. The Monarch Joint Venture out of the University of Minnesota is another great source. And one of the things they do for you is find vendors of milkweed. And they have this long list of sites that sell milkweed. Now you can buy milkweed seed and expect about an 80% failure in germination. Milkweed seeds don't germinate very well. So what you're probably going to want are plugs, pots, and plants for your milkweed garden. But they have the Monarch joint venture is another good source, and especially this, where to get your plants. The other source that I'll mention is the Xerces Society, and they have books about monarch nectar plants specifically for the Midwest. They'll tell you how to plan for monarchs and how to do site preparation, establishment, and installation. They've got lots of good information from the Xerces Society. So I would mention those three. You'll find lots and lots of other sources of information out there. While you're at the Xerces Society, you can put 3 fingers in the air and pledge the pollinator pledge that says, I will grow a variety of bee-friendly, which are also butterfly-friendly plants. I'll protect the bee nest and the caterpillar sources. I'll avoid pesticides, and I'll put up a sign that tells the neighbors what I'm doing, so that I'm part of disseminating the information, telling people the importance of butterflies, pollinators, and their habitat. This is the list of plants that's in our publication from Iowa State University. It would take a horticulturist the rest of the year probably to tell you everything you needed about those. But you'll just see there's lots of flowering plants there, lots of perennials that you probably already have. And they're all good for butterfly nectar sources. Now, of course, the caterpillar food sources is another issue. That's a much smaller list, but that list is also in that publication, RG 601, that I mentioned. But you can see lots of familiar flowers there. So it's not hard to find the flowers you need for a butterfly garden. You just got to get them in a plan and get them planted and get them established. Even under trees and shrubs, there's a long list of things that you could have available that would serve for pollinator sources, would serve as nectar sources. One of my favorites is this one called the 7-Sun tree, because it blooms in the fall of the year. It blooms at a time when I don't get a lot of other flowers in my neighborhood. So I'm glad to see that 7-Sun tree growing out there. Most of these others are going to bloom earlier in the year. So I just point that one out as a later bloomer. Well, what does all this mean? It's a lot of chatter. It's a lot of information. There's a lot of sources out there. You can dig in and find out as much as you want. Yes, monarch butterfly populations, along with other butterflies, are declining. We need pollinators, and they are also declining. So providing nectar and caterpillar food sources will help. It will help the pollinators. It will help the natural enemies. It will help the butterflies. It will help our food supply if you can keep those pollinators going out there in the real world. These feel like pretty small actions to me. What are we doing to preserve, protect, and increase insect diversity? How much of my turf grass can I give up and turn over to a butterfly habitat? I still need enough room for the dog to play ball, but there are edges where I could increase the size of the habitat for other critters and not grow so much turf grass. How much of that could you do? Biodiversity may not make a big difference, but it will help. And as soon as, if we can get our farmer neighbors in on this so that they're planting CRP fields and roadsides and other areas to butterfly habitat, it's going to go a lot farther as we try to replace all the milkweeds that were lost here in the upper Midwest. Small changes are not going to undo the past. We're not going to quickly return monarch butterflies to the status that they were 30 years ago. There have been such huge losses. This is a huge deficit to overcome, but it's what we can do. So I hope you're on board and will take part in helping the monarch butterflies do as much as you can. My email address is drlewis@iastate.edu. Your county extension office knows how to get in touch with me. You're welcome to contact me, but we'll take the rest of our time together to answer questions. So I'm going to leave that up for a little bit and go to the chat and see what I can do.
And I also collected some questions for you, Donald.
All right, we'll go with your collection first.
Okay, so people are very interested in growing milkweed, and some of them have collected seeds from out in the ditch or other places. And so there are some questions around, you already kind of touched on which milkweed varieties the data shows the butterflies like best. But is there anything you can tell us about when they can plant the milkweed seeds, if it's okay for them to be wild foraging for the seeds. Are there any special considerations that people need to think about when they're collecting milkweed seeds?
You can buy milkweed seeds for a small spot. I would encourage you again to buy either plants or pots. If you need a lot of them, you can buy milkweed plugs. Someone else has paid the 80% deficit on milkweed seeds and already has a plant growing for you. Milkweeds don't germinate well. Now, they seed in the fall of the year, don't they? Those pods open up, they blow in the winter. I guess it's probably a late fall winter seeding. And, if you're going to plant acorns, you act like a squirrel and you dig little holes and you stick the acorns in the fall of the year. If you're going to plant milkweeds, you act like whoever plants milkweeds, which I guess is the wind. And when the seeds are blowing, you till up the soil, you scatter the seeds, you cover them very lightly. But they could be winter seeding or fall seeding. But again, keep that area moist and hope for the best. Plant lots of milkweed seeds because not many of them are going to come up. Now, what about seed balls? If I put the seeds in a clop of clay and throw it from my bicycle into the fence row as I'm pedaling down the state highway, that feels good and it's sending a message and it's great public relations, but I'm not sure it accomplishes much. We're waiting for data to prove that those milkweed balls actually work. I think lightly tilling seed into the soil would be better for you. Yeah, I see MS mentioned mud balls just as I was mentioning them as well. It doesn't hurt. It's a great project. It gets lots of people involved. It gives some people something to do, to contribute. It's a cooperative effort. We're waiting to see how many of those germinate. So that would be one of the things you could do. Now, some milkweeds become invasive, and I think swamp milkweed is one of those that you kind of want to watch to make sure you either confine it or you hold it into place or you hoe them out. There's also one called honeyvine milkweed, but that one's a terrible weed. So cross that one off your list. David Drum says, my swamp milkweed got a horrible orange bug infestation. Well, what do we call a bug, a true bug, a hemipteran, that's fairly large in size and it's on milkweed plants? We call it the large milkweed bug. Honest to God, that is its name, the large milkweed bug. They're orange with sort of some black markings. They feed on sap from milkweeds. They interfere with seed production and maturation. They do not hurt the plant and they do not interfere with the monarchs. So milkweed bug is just one of those things that happens, like milkweed aphids happen, but the plants go on in spite of it. David says you also get ugly orange aphids. I think the milkweed aphids are fairly attractive because they're almost bright yellow. Now, here's a solution to you, those of you who are involved with Iowa State University. You plant milkweeds next to Heliopsis because milkweeds get a bright yellow golden colored aphid called oleander aphid, but the milkweeds get a bright yellow aphid. The Heliopsis gets a bright red aphid. So right there in your garden, you have cardinal and gold on the aphid population in your garden. I think that's great.
That's a great tip, Donald. We also had a question come in earlier about the monarchs when they migrate, and if they have a specific destination that they're going to, or if they just stop in random places. Do we have any data about that? Do we have any theories about that?
I think we know a bunch about monarch migration, but it's probably not enough to give you a definitive answer to that question. While they're traveling, there seems to be something about the way trees are shaped or formed or the density of the leaf cover or something that they will come back and stop in the same tree year after year. So there's something about microhabitat that seems to be important to them, but they are following their internal compass. They're following the polarization of light from the sunshine. Even on cloudy days, the light is polarized. They're making their way from Iowa southwestward at a steady clip, helped along by winds occasionally, flying several miles a day. to get to those 9,000-foot hillsides in south central Mexico. And I don't know if they overshoot the mark. Do they ever fly by and have to turn around and come back? I'm not sure, but it's built into their DNA to migrate in the fall of the year, and the distance and direction appears to be built in. I don't know that it's a specific GPS coordinate or what it is, but they find their way there by the tens of millions.
Good to know. We also had a question when you were talking about the lifespan of the monarchs, how some of them only live 2 to 6 weeks in the summer and 8 to 9 months in the fall. What accounts for such a difference in their survival time frame? We've been talking a lot about pollinators this month, and we talked about bees earlier and how certain types of bees have certain different lifespans based on what their role is, if they're a worker or queen or what it might be. Mm-hmm. Is that the same for the monarchs, or why do they have those different lifespans?
It's in their genetic makeup that if they are produced, that is, if the eggs are laid and the caterpillars are feeding in the summertime, long days, hot temperatures, they will not develop the migrating instinct that is already built into them. But in the fall of the year, those caterpillars that are produced in the very end of the summer, shorter days, cooler temperatures, their genetic phenology, their genetic expression is going to be to tank up, store a lot of fat, store a lot of energy, and then they're going to have that migration instinct. It's in every monarch. Remember, the migrating monarchs in the fall of the year may be the great-great-great-grandchildren of the ones that migrated before. So it's built into their DNA how to do all that, and it's environmental cues that determine whether you live fast and die young in the summer, or whether you live slowly, live long, but fly 2,000 miles in the fall.
We also had some questions about the graph that you were showing of the decline in the monarchs over time, mm-hmm. and how there were some spikes in there. So maybe the population would spike back up a little bit, then it would drop again, and it would be fairly consistent. Then there might be another spike. Is there some kind of driver behind these population fluctuations over time?
Good question. All insect species go through expansions and crashes. You know that from your own experience. Some years your Japanese beetle population was incredibly high, and then you didn't see very many the next year. So all species go through these expansions and crashes. As we're fond of saying, there's only one species on Earth whose population increases every year, and that's people. So the monarchs are just like all the other insects, going through expansions and crashes. Do we know why they expanded in 2003, 2004 to a larger number than the previous year? No. Do we know why the population crashed in 2004, 2005? No. I don't think we have that kind of information. But remember, we're looking at the winter population, and that depends on how many monarchs are in the upper Midwest all the way to Canada to make that flight. Was there good breeding, good egg laying, good survival in the summer? Was there good migration in the fall of the year? Did they freeze to death when they got there because of an ice storm? All these variables play into that and cause these expansions and crashes.
Great. So a lot of it is just natural over time.
Yes, natural over time and the vagaries of life.
Mm-hmm.